do a true crime mashup from BuzzFeed. 27 extremely dark true crime stories that people never ever seem to talk about. See, these aren't the ones that you've heard about a million times. I already started to record this and I was so annoyed because it's a BuzzFeed article and I was looking at it on my computer and it kept getting like pop-ups that would make me wait to exit out like a certain amount of seconds. What is this? You can't even read your article. You have to... Annoyed. So, let's try it on the phone. But first, we gotta do some channel maintenance. We gotta do some channel hygiene. Channels are like Neopets. You gotta like feed and water them to make them grow. Is that what they were called? Neopets? Anyways, if you're new here, welcome to my nonsense. If you're old here, welcome back. Oh geez, if you're new here, please consider hitting subscribe. And if you're old here, go double check. Make sure you're subscribed. Hit the like. If you like, leave a comment. It can be anything related to the video. It could just be a hello or a few emojis. Anything as long as it's cool, as long as it's respectful. Hit the notification bell. As always, I'll link my tip jars down below in the description box. No pressure whatsoever, but every $1, $2 helps. That's what allows me to continue to make content. You're invited to my Patreon. Link down below. I know not everybody can come, but you cannot say you weren't invited. All my other links, emails for collabs, emails for customs, social media links down below. All right, took a little sip of water. So I've already read a few of these. Like I said, I just tried to record this video. And so far there was only one that I had heard of. BuzzFeed article from March 18th, 2023, and it is by Crystal Rowe. 27 extremely dark true crime stories that people never, ever, ever seem to talk about. So these aren't your Zodiac killers. These aren't your Jeffrey Dahmers. They're not Ted Bundys. These are ones that got less coverage. For what reason? How come some take off and some don't? You guys, I did a true crime over on my Patreon a couple months ago, or like a month ago, and I have not been able to even think about true crime since then. That's why I'm doing like a mashup now, because it's not any kind of deep dive, it's just like a mashup. But that one was so rough. So rough. Alright, number one, we have the story of Terry Jo Duperrault, the sea orphan from 1961. Terry Jo Duperrault was found floating on a small raft in the ocean when she was 11 years old. A few days before she was discovered, another man, Julian Harvey, was rescued from a sinking yacht, supposedly the sole survivor. But when it was discovered that Terry was another survivor from the same yacht, Julian was notified and he himself the next day, or shortly after. Turns out Julian was hired by Terry's family to be the captain of the yacht for an around-the-globe once-in-a-lifetime trip that the family had saved up for. Julian, however, proceeded to everyone on the boat, and he left Terry on the sinking boat to drown before escaping the yacht, and he didn't expect her to survive. Well, she did. And I would hope, even if she didn't, that he would have been looked at, but... Number two, the disappearance of Teresa Ann Beer from 1987. This girl was 16 years old on a camping trip with a 43-year-old man in the Sierra Nevada mountains. We have a crime right there, don't we? I guess not. But it gets worse. Once Welsh returned from the trip, he claimed Teresa had been abducted by Bigfoot. He was initially charged with abducting Teresa, but the charges were dismissed. So there's just no resolution here. No justice. No answers. Number three, the Wednesday Strangler, aka the Saga Prefecture Strangler, who was active from 75 to 89 in Japan. In the late 70s and 80s, each of the 7 victims disappeared on a Wednesday and were all later found dead, having been strangled in random places within 12 miles of each other. The killer was never caught. Number 4, the murder of Skylar Neese. This is the one, so far, the only one that I had heard about. Skylar Neese mysteriously disappeared, but was then later discovered murdered by her 2 best friends. Neese was last seen July 6th, 2012. Initially considered to be a runaway, which is what they always try to label everything on. Rachel Shove confessed to the planning and the murder of Niece along with another friend, Shalia Eddy. Niece's body was later found on January 16th, 2013. According to state police, their reasoning was that they just didn't like her. If you have raised kids through, especially girls, through middle school and high school, you know how bad it gets. You see these friends being horrible to each other, forming groups like, oh, I got mad at her about this, we should all be mad at her, stuff like that. Especially if you've been a girl in middle school and high school, you know how weird it gets. I would never want to go through those years again. Look how far these girls took it. What a freaking nightmare. Unreal. They just didn't like her. Okay, so don't hang out with her. Who put Bella down the witch elm from 1944? Bella was a skeletonized woman found in the trunk of a wych elm tree in Worcestershire, England in 1943. But popular theories range from Bella being a Birmingham sex worker, a German spy, a Dutch spy, and the victim of an occult ritual, but no one ever discovered her identity. The location of remains and autopsy records are unknown. Who put Bella down the wych elm was a graffiti message that mysteriously appeared on a wall in Birmingham in 1944 after the 1943 discovery of Bella's remains. Since the 70s, similar graffiti has occasionally appeared on a nearby obelisk. What's an obelisk? I mean, she doesn't have to be one or the other. She could have been all of those. She could have been a sex worker spy. She could have been the victim of an occult ritual. Okay. This one was pretty creepy. The Satanic Verses of Hitoshi Igarashi in 1991. Satanic Verses Murder is one I just looked up while searching for true crime stories in Japan. On July 12, 1991, scholar Hitoshi Igarashi was found dead in his office at the University of Tsukuba after he translated the novel The Satanic Verses into Japanese. So all he did was translate. That was what he did. He didn't write it. I don't think he believed in this stuff. He translated. For context, 1989, the Supreme Leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, issued a fatwa on Salman Rushdie, the author of that novel, due to how controversial it is within Muslim communities. 2 years later, Khomeini's successor, Ali Khamenei, issued another fatwa on anyone who was involved with the novel's publication in any way. This included Igarashi. Igarashi's killers have never been found, even 31 years later. Number 7, the murder of Peace Corps volunteer Kate Pusey, 2009. I think I have heard of this one. Pusey was murdered, and it's P-U-Z-E-Y. Pusey was murdered while working the Peace Corps in Benin. She was concerned about inappropriate relationships a male working at her school was having with students, and she reported it. And they let the man she was concerned about know that she had reported it. That's smart. That's smart. Then she ended up, the man and the couple of his supposed accomplices were held in prison without any real trial for a few years. And then it was determined they didn't do it, and then nothing. No one was held accountable, and least of all the Peace Corps. Number 8, the hangman or killer cop, aka Gerard John Schaefer Jr., a former sheriff's deputy and suspected serial killer active in Florida in the 70s. 70s. The golden age of serial killing. I just recently learned about this horrible, horrible man. He is responsible for the murders of many women If you love listening to true crime, I recommend listening to the podcast about this guy. My jaw was on the floor that someone could carry out such horrific acts. So it doesn't give us much details on him, but it sounds like he used his position to get a hold of women and then serial kill. Number 9, the Ant Hill Kids cult, which was active from the 70s to the 80s. Just look it up. Worst cult I've ever read about. Founded by a man named Roche Thierold in 1977, the Ant Hill Kids was a doomsday cult. Thierold had multiple wives and impregnated all female members of the cult as a religious requirement. He fathered 26 children. Members of the cult were subject to both physical and SA. The cult dissolved in 1989, and Thierold was eventually convicted of murder in 1993. Number 10, the Pizza Killers, aka Thomas Koskovich and Jason Vreeland from 1997. New Jersey teens Koskovich and Vreeland were just 18 and 19 years old, respectively, when they killed 2 random chosen pizza delivery men, Giorgio Guiara and Jeremy Giordano. The delivery men were lured into an abandoned house in a remote location and violently shot to death multiple times in their car. According to law enforcement at the time, the teens' motivation was that they just wanted to see what it would be like. They wanted to see what it would be like. Being part of the human race is really quite the experience. 10. The brutal murder of Timothy Coggins, 1983. This happened in the 80s in Georgia. Coggins, a 23-year-old black man, was accused of flirting and messing around with a white girl. The girl's boyfriend and his friend, who were both white, brutally killed him and left him in the woods. The cops didn't do anything about it, and it turns out a lot of them on the force were part of the Triple K. The case recently got reopened, and the 2 white men are now paying for their crimes. It's crazy how I never even heard of him until a few months ago. The police protected the murderers and didn't care. I hate it here. 12. The Somerton Man, an unidentified man found on a beach in Australia in 1948. Maybe it's well-known in Australia, but in the States you barely hear about it. The basic gist is that the body of an unidentified man was found December 1st, 1948 at Somerton Beach near Adelaide, South Australia. Nothing in his pockets aside from a scrap of paper from the book The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and the phrase roughly translated to "It's over." The police found the book from which the message was torn, and there was a coded message in it. To this day, the message has not been decoded, but there are rumors he may have been identified. Recent DNA analysis suggests that he was a man named Carl Charles Webb, and his mysterious scraps of paper are thought to be from poetry books, some of which were his own poems, although there's still a lot of mystery surrounding his death. My stomach is about to growl. Number 13, the Bender family, aka the Bloody Benders, a family of serial killers. They were a whole family of serial killers that lured weary travelers to their B&B and accumulated at least 11 victims between 1872 and 1873. So 11 victims, 1 year. Like 1 a month. Despite numerous attempts, they were never apprehended. How not? Wow. Okay. And that's your, family fun? Number 14, the Hachioji supermarket triple murder of 1995. Not long ago, I was watching Hell Dogs 2022, a Japanese crime thriller, with an elder relative when he thought the murder of 3 supermarket employees in the film seemed familiar. Turned out he was thinking of the Hachioji supermarket triple murder of 1995. 3 part-time supermarket employees, 16-year-old, 17-year-old, and a lady in her 40s, were found in the office at the supermarket with their hands bound and heads shot. The police believed each was shot when they couldn't provide the safe combination. The killer was never caught. The triple murders dominated the news until the 2000s. Okay. Number 15, Michael Ryan and the Church of Yahweh. Cult murders of the 80s, Nebraska. Ryan was a survivalist who formed a religious cult in the small town of Rulo, Nebraska. He and his followers became involved in many horrific acts of abuse, culminating in the gruesome torture of the fellow members of their murders. Ryan was eventually convicted of murder and sentenced to death. The crimes were truly horrifying and involved skinning while they were alive. The murder of Terada, 2006. Famous case in Israel where I live, but I'm not sure how known it is outside the country. Tara was a 13-year-old girl who in 2006 was found brutally murdered in a girl's bathroom at her school. The investigation begins, and a craftsman that worked in the school was suspected and arrested. He eventually confessed to the murder, but his confession didn't really match the evidence. Eventually he claimed he was innocent, and now there's a retrial to prove his innocence and find the real killer. I read a book like that. What was it called? It was good. The author has 2 really, really big name books that are translated, but my nose is starting to itch. I know one of the books is called Confessions. The other one is, I think it starts with a P. Number 17, the monster of Miramichi, aka Alan Joseph Legier, a serial killer active in the 80s. Alan Legier, along with 2 accomplices, robbed and beat an elderly couple in their convenience store. The woman also suffered and her husband died. After being convicted of going to jail, Legier escaped prison and then went on a months-long revenge spree in northern New Brunswick town in Canada before being recaptured. Why are we letting these people out? Why are we letting violent, multiple charged offenders out? Number 18, David Parker Ray, aka the Toy Box Killer. Oh, I've heard of him. Active in the 90s. He had an RV he turned into a torture wagon. He would abduct women with the help of female accomplice and play this seriously demented recording where he would lay out every horrible thing he was going to do to them. You can find the transcript online, and it's absolutely terrifying. It's probably the most horrible thing I've ever read. He died in jail before the trial could really take off, and the victims never got justice. How is he going to die before the trial takes off? Like, what died of what? Number 19, the Shankill Butchers, a gang active in 1975 to 1982 in Northern Ireland, responsible for dozens of deaths. Growing up, we didn't hear a lot about it other than it happened. It was to be expected in Ireland at the time that Catholics were murdered, and no one really gave a crap. And talking about it wasn't really done. There was no mystery behind it. There's no real content to be gleaned from it. By today's podcast enthusiasts and creators, it's just really sad and terrifying story that seems like very few people know about or are even interested in outside of Ireland. '20, the Hendricks family murders of Bloomington, Illinois in 1983. I'm pretty sure I've heard of this one. 1983, mother Susan Hendricks and children Becky 9, Grace 7, Benjamin 5 were found murdered by an axe in their beds. Investigation quickly zeroed in on the husband, Father David Hendricks, to the exclusion of all other possibilities. He was tried, convicted, overturned, and released. Officially, the murders are unsolved, and the court of public opinions were divided. The book Reasonable Doubt by local journalist Steve Vogel chronicles the investigations of the trial. I've read it multiple times, and more each time I have more questions than answers about this case. 21. The unsolved murder of Frank Little in 1917. He was a labor leader who was found murdered in Butte, Montana, and no one was arrested. Little joined the Industrial Workers of the World Union in 1905, eventually joining their executive board. Aside from leading the union, he was also a strike organizer and anti-war protester. According to reports at the time, Little was beaten by 6 men, abducted, and then in a railway embankment with a note pinned to his leg that read, "First and last warning." So basically these people don't like either or all of the strikes, unions, or war protesting. And this is how they're going to show they don't like it and warn everybody else not to meet this same demise. Okay. 22. The Leicester Street murders in 2008. This happened in Memphis. Jesse Dotson got in a fight with his brother. He wound up killing him and then proceeded to kill everyone in the house. But there were 3 survivors, all children. When they were able to talk to the police, all they said was Uncle Jesse did it. And Jesse was sentenced to death for 6 counts of first-degree murder. There were theories that there was a drug deal that went bad and a gang-related killing. I remember that. I do remember hearing about that. 23. The disappearance of Ray Gricar in 2005. Always give me the heebie-jeebies. He was a district attorney in Center County, PA, and disappeared in 2005 under suspicious circumstances. He hasn't been found or recovered since, and there are a few theories to what happened. Some think he was killed after having busted a drug ring, and others think he was killed in an attempt to delay persecuting Jerry Sandusky for his SA crimes against young boys, among other theories. Yeah, it could be anything. It could be any person that had a problem with him, you know? Okay. Disappearance of Tracy Pittman Craigley, number 24, in 1998. She's been missing from Wetumpka, Alabama since 1988. 98. Her car was found abandoned with her 2 unharmed 2-year-old daughter still inside, as well as her purse. She was due to start a new job the next day, and it's noted that her divorce was finalized 16 days prior to her disappearance. So did we check them out? Doesn't say. 25. Bruce MacArthur, a serial killer active in 2010s in Toronto, Canada. Targeted marginalized people, primarily gay men of color. He buried their body parts in landscape pots at a client's home that he landscaped at. Police arrested him right before he was about 2 murders. Next victim, they found the victim tied up when they entered his home. So they caught him in the act. I'm glad they did. Had they been an hour later? Can you imagine being the next victim? Like, oh my God. And then that happens. Like, wow. You'd really feel like a miracle. A miracle just happened to you. 26. Richard Wershey Jr., White Boy Rick. Former drug trafficker. So he's White Boy Rick, so I don't think this is very unheard of. There's a whole movie. Informant active in the 80s. He was 14 and the son of an FBI informant. His dad was supposed to go undercover as a coke dealer, but it was thought that a middle-aged white man selling drugs in the middle of Detroit might raise some red flags, so they decided to send Rick out as a 14-year-old to sell drugs. They trained him on how to make sales, and he became fully immersed in that world. After his time working undercover was over, he decided to sell drugs for real in order to support his impoverished family. How is he impoverished if his dad was just maybe just a regular informant? I was thinking, like, what? Okay. After his time working undercover was over, he decided to sell drugs for real in order to support his impoverished family. He was arrested when he was 17 for possession and was recently released. It's more of a story of corruption than crime, but definitely fits the category and such a bizarre story that I don't think a lot of people know about. Yeah, okay, so he was trained at 14. He's from an impoverished family. This is how you make ends meet. Pretend this is how you make ends meet for several years. And then you think just after that, he should have never been an informant. At 14, you can't make that decision at 14. You shouldn't be able to consent to that at 14. Oh, here, we're going to program you. And then when you get older, we want you to unprogram yourself. 27. Finally, the unsolved Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders that took place from 1972 to 1973 in Northern California. It's the last one. There's so much unknown, and they're retesting DNA now 50 years later. The Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders involved a series of 7 and possibly more murders of all female hitchhikers. All of the victims' bodies were found in rural areas near steep embankments or near the road, and the murders remain unsolved. Wow. So if you're still listening, what's a case that you don't think that many people know about? Leave it in the comments. I watch a lot of true crime, so I think I know like a lot of the bigger ones, but there's some just as sinister ones that happen that don't get any coverage or don't get very much coverage. Anyway, if you are still watching, I'm sure you're fully traumatized. Go watch something lighter next. Watch something funny next. I hope